All right, and it looks like we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Jamil Hamilton. I'm the manager of public policy and advocacy. And I want to say thank you so much for joining our event. This is Supporting Minority Mental Health, a discussion with New York City policymakers of color. During this event, you'll be hearing from two New York City policymakers of color, Senator Gustavo Rivera and Deputy Public Advocate Rama Issa-Ibrahim. At the conclusion of this panel, we will have an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So if anytime during the panel you have any questions, please enter it into either the chat box or the Facebook chat box, and we will read those questions. And if time permits, we will read as many of them as possible. In addition, if you are joining us via Zoom, please mute your microphone, please, to prevent any unnecessary noise in the background. Again, this is the Supporting Minority Mental Health panel, discussion with New York City policymakers of color, and we are so excited to have you join us. So, without wasting any more time, let's begin. I would like our panelists to introduce themselves, and also while they're introducing themselves, please answer the question. Why is mental health important to you? As a reminder, this is, just so you all know, July is Minority Mental Health Month. So part of the reason NAMI wanted to have this event is because we wanted to kick off this month by having policymakers of color really describe, talk about their experience and really talk about what's it been like, being a policymaker while also being a minority. So let's begin with Senator Gustavo Rivera. Please introduce yourself and let us, tell us, why is mental health important to you?
Good afternoon to everybody. Again, State Senator Gustavo Rivera from the 33rd District in the Boogie Down Bronx. Got to throw up my X, got to make sure that I rep for my Bronx borough. I am the State Senator for the 33rd District, and I'm the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate. And the reason that mental health is important to me is because health is important to me. I want to make sure that people around the state, certainly people in my district, are healthy. And if we don't take into account the mental health of an individual, if we just look at the physical health of the person, we're not looking at the entire person. So it's important to me because I like to have healthy people. New Yorkers be healthy.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Next, we will have Deputy Public Advocate Rama Issa-Ibrahim. Can you please go ahead and please introduce yourself and let us know, why is mental health important to you?
Thanks, Jamil. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Rama Issa-Ibrahim, and I am Deputy Public Advocate for Justice, Health, Equity, and Safety at the Office of the Public Advocate, Jumaane Williams. Mental health is important to me for a few reasons. One, I am an immigrant, and my family migrated from Syria, so I come from a community that has seen a lot of trauma and generational trauma and has had to deal with a lot of mental health issues without, naming that that's like mental health related issues. And so that's one piece of it. And the second, I've had to struggle with my own mental health over the years. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. So trauma has had an impact on me, and therefore, we know that trauma can impact someone's mental health. And so I've had my own journey, and also lived with someone who's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so mental health has been pretty much a part of my life. And it's important for me to figure out how my community and my loved ones are able to access those much needed services, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think as you both really have mentioned, one, mental health is absolutely health, and it's vital that we understand that. And two, I know mental health, something we like to say at NAMI is it's really a spectrum, right? Mental health is really, there's a lot of layers to it. And it's something that really is around us, is around us all the time. And I think a lot of folks don't realize the importance of maintaining not only our own mental health, but the mental health of others, and how, the life we live and the things that happen to us can impact our mental health. So thank you so much for both of you for sharing that. So let's jump into the questions now. So like I said, this is Minority Mental Health Month. And so we really want to think about specifically think about how people of color are impacted by the things that impact their mental health. And so something NAMI recently did in solidarity with the protesters, in the current civil unrest that's happening, we put out a statement that said a couple of things. One, Black Lives Matter. And two, we called out the fact that racism is a public health crisis and that racism absolutely can impact mental health. So my question to both of you, and let's start with the Deputy Public Advocate and then move to the Senator. What do you believe is the impact of racism on mental health? And have you seen or personally experienced the negative impacts of the negative mental health effects of racism? So again, what do you believe is the impact of racism on mental health? And have you seen or personally experienced the negative mental health effects of racism personally in your life? And we'll start with the Deputy Public Advocate, please.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The impacts of racism on our mental health. I think there's like twofolds. One, as we talk about access and delivery of services, right? Like a lot of folks in Black and Brown communities have a much difficult time accessing services. A lot of the services are not necessarily catered to Black and Brown folks, right? And so access to services have always been difficult, but the delivery of services has always been difficult as well. And I think race is a lot to play. Like racial equity is a conversation that needs to be centered as we speak about, access and delivery of services. There's such a lack of, culturally competent services within the mental health field. But I used to run the Arab American Association prior to my job at the Public Advocate's Office. And it took me over 6 months to hire a social worker who was able to speak Arabic and English at the same time. And I think a lot of that shows just the lack of professionals within this field who can actually service our community. And I think, as we speak about racism during this time, and we've seen just the way that the NYPD has, showed its true colors more recently, we're able to see how difficult it can be for folks to access those services when they know that the responses are going to be what they are. And the reason why I bring out the PD right now is because when you're in a moment of crisis, the only resource that's out there is to call 911, right? So if you're in a moment of crisis, you have to call 911, and the response is always a police response. And for Black and Brown communities, a police response is not what we're looking for, right? We're looking for treatment, we're looking for healing, we're looking for spaces like respite centers and diversion centers and urgent care for folks who are experiencing crisis. And that's not how the system was built. The system was built in ways where, Rikers is the largest mental health facility in the country. And the system was built in a way that if folks have substance use disorder or have severe mental health issues, they end up in jails. And if we look at our jail population today, around 2,500, around 2,500 folks are sitting in jail today. The majority of them on pretrial are experiencing some sort of mental health issues. That's of a population of almost 4,000 folks who are sitting in our jails today. That's more than half, like significantly higher than 50%. And those are the effects of racism. When you are treating, the symptoms of someone's, when you're treating behavioral health in a way that criminalizes someone, saying that a Black or Brown person behaving, especially, let's talk about young people in our schools, right? If a Black or Brown young person is behaving a certain way in our schools, the way that we deal with that is, calling a school safety agent officer to come and take that child out of the classroom and, issue them summons and handcuff them and take them to central booking. And that's just what's happening in our schools today. Those are young people that are being treated this way for behaving a certain way. And we don't see the same treatment of white folks. And if we talk about policing in general, And we think about how white folks feel in moment of crisis, and if they feel threatened by calling the cops, their response is very different than, you know, communities of color or Black and brown communities. When you're experiencing a moment of crisis, the last thing that you want to do is have the police officer show up at your house. Whereas, you know, in other communities, in communities where, you know, they're not overly policed, that's not the case. And to speak specifically about the Arab and Muslim community, which is a lot of the space that I've organized in, the other piece to this is just like surveillance, for example, in the Muslim community, right? Like post 9/11, we've seen a huge spike in surveillance of Arabs and Muslims. And that kind of surveillance had real impact on the health of the community, where there's a constant sense of paranoia, right? Like you don't know who to trust, you don't know who you're interacting with, you don't know if the person who's in your college, in your MSA, in your Muslim association, and in school is an informant, right? And so that what that does to someone's psyche is very detrimental. And so thinking about it both ways in terms of like service delivery, and as well what the effects of racism have on our own psyche and our own mental health, and what that drives us to do, you know, and the spaces that it kind of pushes us towards.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. That was really great. I think you covered a lot of ground. You know, specifically when you mentioned, I know the lack of the service delivery issues, and then the impact of racism. You know, I grew up in South Central LA. My childhood home where I grew up is about 10 minutes away from the Rodney King riots. You know, so when I think a lot about, you know, I can definitely, you know, although I haven't grown up Arab American or Muslim, I do understand the feeling of surveillance. And I understand that feeling of police constantly just being around, and police this constant feel of, well, I know I haven't done anything, so why am I seeing police? You know, and it's. I actually just had a conversation where it kind of can lead to paranoia and some, you know, anxiety. So thank you so much for speaking about that. Senator Rivera, same question for you. What do you believe is the impact of racism on mental health? And have you seen or personally experienced negative mental health effects of racism?
The story of racism in America is a story of historical generational trauma. And the impact that the original sin, I mean, there's a lady named Condoleezza Rice, right? Remember, she used to be Secretary of State. Was she Secretary of State under Bush? She was a very high-ranking foreign affairs. Yeah, yep, Secretary. She's a very, very smart woman. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with her on, but she was one person who said that, and she's not the first one who said it, but it's the first time that I heard it when she said it years ago, that the original sin of the United States is slavery. And the type of impact that that has had on institutions around health, around housing, around employment, around policing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is profound, and it is completely covers almost every aspect of American life. And we have never done, this country has never, unlike South Africa, Rwanda, Germany, we have never had a truth and reconciliation process where we can actually have a real conversation about the impact that this has. Now, it's not that it hasn't been said. Black scholars have been saying it ever since the time of emancipation. And certainly there's activists who have been saying it, like in the last 10 minutes, I'm sure, down by City Hall. There's people who are still protesting down there, and they're making that connection. But the reality is that the overwhelming majority of our country, even people of color, have not been taught to make that connection, right? That there is a direct connection between the history of our country, racism being a direct descendant of slavery, and then all of the institutions that come from that. So have I seen it? Absolutely. Every time that I mean, just to talk for a second about the fact I'm the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate. And one of the piece of legislation that I think that I fight for the most is a piece of legislation called the New York Health Act. And it is a piece of legislation that would guarantee universal access to healthcare to every single New Yorker, regardless of their wealth, their age, their gender, their immigration status. I think if you're a human, you should have access to healthcare. It's a crazy notion, I know. But so while talking about the disparities that exist in healthcare, and certainly looking at the disparities that exist in my own borough and in my own district, you just start asking questions when you start seeing things that just don't make sense unless you talk about the legacy of racism. And so I have seen it every day when I think about the healthcare disparities that we're trying to fix. I have seen it every day when I think about the lack of access to money that some of my small business owners have in my district to be able to put up their stores. I see it in the way that housing has been segregated, how education systems are segregated. So I see it every day, and it is a part of our job to make sure that that becomes a national discussion. And I believe that the process that we're undergoing right now presents us not with the opportunity to do that, but with the obligation to underline how these systems, so many of them around us, are broken, and how we must move in a different direction. I believe that truth and reconciliation is the first step to that. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, for really, both of you, for really framing how systemic.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Watkins, Ms. Watkins is correct. Oh, Rosalia, I'm not sure, but Rosalia Watkins says the original sin of America was taking the land from the indigenous people of this land, and slavery was the second. Thank you for this. Thank you for the amendment. You are correct. Both of these things are very much things that define our country. And if we ignore it, we're not going to be able to go forward, really, if we don't ignore it. Sorry for interrupting, but Rosalia Watkins mentioned that. I want to make sure that I acknowledged it.
Yeah, no, and thank you for pointing that out. Actually, and a lot of, you mentioned South Africa. In a lot of ways, America truly is an apartheid state. This is a settler colonial apartheid state. This is a country where we had an indigenous population here, thriving indigenous culture, civilization, and they were white. So it was essentially a genocide. Folks were massacred. And then we also had slavery at the same time, where we were wiping folks out. We also are building these institutions of slavery. So essentially, our country's really been built on making straight white men feel as comfortable as possible and giving them as many opportunities as possible. So thank you both for sharing that. And I love how you said, this is not just an opportunity, but an obligation to really think about how, what are the issues, and then how can we really proactively change them? And that's something NAMI New York City's, we feel our mission is to improve the lives of people and individuals impacted by mental illness. And we can't fulfill that mission until we really look at how systemic racism has been, look at the delivery, how systemic, the racism in delivery models, the racism in where hospitals are located. And being in South Central LA, when I was growing up, I'm not even sure if I wanted to talk to a therapist, where would I even go? Where would you even begin, So thank you so much for sharing for sharing that. And Senator, you mentioned the New York Health Act, which I think is a great segue to my next question, which is, what policy changes are needed? How about this? What are some of the policy changes needed to support the mental health of Black, Indigenous people of color? And we'll start with the Senator. I think the New York Health Act is a big piece of that, but please, what are some policy changes you think we need so we can help support mental health?
You will be shocked to learn that I'm going to start by talking about the New York Health Act again.
No way, I don't believe it.
Sorry. Yeah, you know what? You get surprised when these things happen. I would encourage everyone on this panel call, whatever. What are we calling this? Not a town hall. What are we calling it?
It was a panel, but there's only two, so I don't know if legally we can call it a panel. So I might bump us up to symposium. Why not call it a symposium? Yeah, why not?
Very well.
Let's do it.
Well, thank you for all of you joining this symposium. This is for us to sound fancy, but anyone who is part of this symposium, if you are not familiar with the New York Health Act, you should go to Campaign for New York Health. I figure that most folks who are on this are familiar with it, but if you're not, Campaign for New York Health, you can visit them. You can Google that and it'll take you to the website. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring a single payer system of healthcare to the state of New York. We can do it and we should do it. And in one of the many aspects of it, as it relates particularly to mental and behavioral health, is that it would be included. And that's kind of the big, spoiler alert, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a system in which all healthcare is covered. It is funded equitably. and it just believes, it starts with the notion that healthcare is a human right and we should have it, right? We should not be wasting billions of dollars on insurance company profits, on things that don't actually provide care. Administrative costs are not about providing care. Insurance companies are not designed to provide care, and we need to make sure that we invest those dollars into guarantee every New Yorker has access to healthcare, in particular as it relates to mental health. So that is certainly one thing, and that is a long-term process that I think, and when I say long-term, it means because of its difficulty, and I will acknowledge both that it is politically and technically difficult to take a system that we have, the one that we have right now, which obviously does not work. When you have a system that relies, a healthcare system that is not really about healthcare delivery, it is about insurance, right? And the idea that you would have insurance, it depends not only if you're employed, but if you're employed in the right place and have the right type of job. And then if we see a system was built completely around that, right? And then you have over 40 million people overnight, through no fault of their own, now are unemployed. What do we do now? and that puts us in a situation. This is why I've been consistently saying it is not about opportunity, it is about obligation, because it is said, right, that crisis presents opportunity, which is true. But what I want us to do is to think about, these are issues that many of the people right here have been talking about forever. There's the idea that we should provide healthcare as a human right is not new. The idea that we should destigmatize mental health so that we can actually treat it as what it is, a condition, that we should destigmatize addiction so we treat it as the public health crisis that it is. This is not new. We're not discovering things. What we are doing is building on the work of those who have fought, sometimes in the darkness and sometimes in quiet corners where they've been pushed to. Now they're in the center. Now the conversations are in the center because of the crisis. And so that only underlines the obligation that we have to say we're going to take the bull by the horns. And in this case, it might literally be the damn bull down at City Hall, right? Down at Wall Street. We would take that freaking thing and we will actually say, let's actually deal with how we change these systems in the long term. And these things are not going to be easy. So the New York Health Act is just one piece of a larger puzzle. There's a lot of other smaller things. And I could talk, I have like, just for me, I have like 12 different bills related directly to COVID-19 and some of the impact that COVID-19 has had on people, whether it's on securing PPE for home health aides that don't work in a nursing home, but are actually visit people at home in their home settings, or protecting people from the debt, from medical debt that they'll have because of COVID-19, extending, making sure that people that are undocumented get access to healthcare during this process. There's a lot of things that I could tell you that as far as the bill that I've introduced, but the big one for me would be the New York Health Act, because that would actually address many of these concerns. And I would ask every one of y'all, if you have not, just join our efforts to push in that direction.
Thank you so much for that. And as I'm sure you know, NAMI New York City, we're really big supporters of the New York Health Act, and we are.
I do know that.
Yes, and we are the Campaign for New York Health. So we are very big supporters, and we're looking at, just so you know, we're working on pushing out we'll make it easy so folks can send out an email to all their elected officials saying New York Health Act, please. Deputy Public Advocate Issa-Ibrahim. I love how long your title is. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Anyway, can you tell me what are some policy changes you think are needed to support the mental health of Black, Indigenous, people of color?
Yeah, I think like the senator covered it. I feel like if we can just see health as, a human right issue, and that's it. Like everybody is it's not a luxury to have access to healthcare. It should not be a luxury. It shouldn't be that if you're unemployed that you're not able to access, doctors and nurses or, mental health counselors. That's ridiculous in a country like the United States of America, and even more ridiculous in a city like New York. just this idea that, you know, only people with privilege are able to access, you know, mental health services. It's insane. It really is. It is a human right, and everyone should be able to have access to healthcare. And mental health is part of our larger health care, right? And I think that um, we've also done a pretty lousy job in separating these two things, like physical health as separate from mental health. And it's not. Both things are one. It's our health, whether it's our mental health or our physical health. And I think that, you know, someone who comes from, again, the Arab immigrant community, I will tell you that, you know, there's such a large stigma around mental health, but we know folks are struggling with mental health when they start telling you just physical pains that they're experiencing, like my back hurts and my chest hurts and my arm hurts, and they can't name that as like part of like anxiety, for example, or that they're struggling with something in their lives and it's manifesting into physical pain, right? Because we talk so little about just how our brain can affect the rest of our body, and like how our moods and our behaviors can affect the rest of our physical health. And I think that if we're able to address our physical health the same way we address our mental health, we can go very, very far in making sure that communities are thriving and the communities are healthy. And in order to do that, it's what the senator was talking about, like healthcare should just be accessible, not just only accessible, it should be affordable. Folks should not have to go bankrupt because they need to take care of their health. Again, whether it's physical or mental, right? And I think that once we move the framework and the conversation into accepting that this is an issue, this is a right that every human that lives in this country should be granted, then I think that the conversation will be very different around, you know, what are sort of the policies that we need to pass in order to have better access for folks. Because I think the first thing is we need to just pass a major policy saying that everyone can have access to it and everyone is able to afford, you know, care for their mental and physical health.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, growing up, luckily I came from a union family. So my mom was in a union. So even though she didn't graduate college, but she was able to had a good job, and I had healthcare. Me and my younger brother had healthcare. I honestly, growing up, I thought it was just $10. I thought everyone paid $10 to go to the doctor, and everyone paid $10 for prescriptions. So I was so confused growing up, hearing like, you know, doctor visits are, you know, hundreds of dollars, or, you know, an inhaler. I have asthma, so an inhaler, something like an inhaler, if it's not free for me, it's often been $10. Hearing people can't afford inhalers like sounded ridiculous, and it's
bro, we're still confused now.
Yeah, exactly. The
like
older I get, the more confused I am.
Every professional on here has had that issue when they're like, wait a minute, what plan do I pick? What the thing? And the going back, and it's like, but what exactly does this mean? What is covered? What's drugs? What? Huh?
Yeah.
Shouldn't do that. We should change that anyway.
It's a scam. No, it's a scam.
It's
New York Health Act. Let's do it.
I mean, I think the stress of it too, right? Like when you jump into a new job and you're looking through all these different plans and you're like, I'm not sure what's best for me. And I'm making a decision based on my pocket, based on what I can afford, instead of what I need, you know, for my own health to keep myself healthy. And that's a problem when you have to think about, you know, what you make and if you can afford it.
And whomever Rosalia Watkins is, they're still killing it. Friggin' formularies. You're absolutely right. Where's Rosalia? Oh, there she is. There you are. There she's. Every time you see her typing, just stop.
You're trying to take my job, I think.
She's gonna put some brilliant stuff on there. Yes, go ahead.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there. Access to healthcare and mental health care is a part of healthcare, right? But access to physical and mental health care is crucial. All right, so next question. I'm really enjoying this conversation, by the way, y'all. Next question.
You thought you were gonna be bored? Is that what you thought?
You know, I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say that. But I'm enjoying the conversation. I am enjoying. Look, in the age of Rona, there's been a lot of panels, a lot of workshops, a lot of symposiums, and some of them I'm like, wow. And you're now boring me inside my own house. This is worse than going to the event. But anyway, let's go to the next question. And I'm going to throw this first to Deputy Public Advocate Issa-Ibrahim. How could defunding NYPD help support the mental health and wellness of communities of color?
Oh, this is so timely.
Take it away, madam.
I mean, I think I touched a little bit earlier on about just like the response during crisis, right? Like the response, we don't really have a system in place that could service the needs of the people, right? So if folks are going through a moment of crisis, and we're really just speaking about the crisis moment right now, when they get to that moment, they only have one place to call, which is 911, which means like that's a police response, right? Imagine a world where not only you don't have a police response, but you have enough money to build more respite centers, and you have enough funding to build diversion centers so folks don't end up in jail. A world when someone like Saheed Vassell is walking the streets of Crown Heights and is not killed because his behavior seemed threatening to people, right? A world where somebody like Saheed Vassell is able to go to a place to access services instead of ended up dead because someone was again feeling threatened by just his behavior, right? I think that we need a lot of creativity in government in general, but also that lack of creativity have created a police force that is just tasked to doing everything, handling all the social elements of our society, and that's not what police was created to do. That's not the job of police to begin with. Those are the jobs of social workers, mental health professionals, peers, right? Those are the jobs of folks like us who understand what's going on, folks who are trained in de-escalation, folks who are able to go to someone's house and have a conversation with someone who's going through crisis. We need a system where you don't even have that moment of crisis, right? Where there's like several other steps in the way to avoid you from getting to that point, right? And in order to do that,
I'm sorry, really quick, Rama. I think someone can you everyone make sure their phone's on mute? Rama's dropping some really great knowledge right now, and I can't hear it. So if you could please just make sure you're on mute. Please, all right, please continue.
I'm co-hosting, so I'll go through and I'll mute everybody who's making noise.
I'm putting the senator on y'all. Watch out.
I got this. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think like when we had that conversation about defund NYPD, a lot of folks got lost in the weeds of like, does that mean that we're just getting rid of our police force? And it's like, no, what we're talking about is that the police force just does way too much. And they're doing work that is not supposed to be done by the police, right? Work that could be done by social workers and teachers and nurses and advocates and peers, right? So thinking about just like homelessness, right? Like the subway diversion program, that is not a program that should exist under the NYPD. That's something that, should reside with a community-based organization. Folks who probably were homeless themselves, right? Who can go to other homeless folks and have like a conversation and provide services for them and tell them, you know what, you don't have to be here. There is this place to go to. There's these services to access. Let's have a conversation of like, maybe of you wanting to get out of the situation if you so want to, right? There's shelters, there's other, there's ways of dealing with social issues that do not necessarily need to involve the police. And in mental health specifically, right? I said a lot about what a response looks like, but let's even go to our school system, right? And something that I brought up early on, a lot of behaviors that children might be exhibiting in the classroom don't need to be responded through, arrests or handcuffing young people. You know, all it needs is like a restorative justice coordinator to be able to de-escalate the situation. You know, an advocate that can maybe sit down with the parents of that young person and try to understand where that behavior is coming from, right? We need to really think holistically about how do we handle social behaviors. And I strongly believe that being able to defund the police to be able to reinvest that money in other services is the way to go. The NYPD has a $6 billion budget and, you know, a force of 37,000 uniformed people in the city. And like I said earlier on, more than half of our jails are folks that are struggling with mental health. That should say something. That should say a lot. That says that the way that we're dealing with folks struggling is through incarceration and not through healing. And if we're able to move some of that money into other social service agencies and community-based organizations who are embedded in the community, who understand Black and Brown communities, who come from these communities, who can deliver culturally competent services, if we're able to redistribute that money that way, then I guarantee you that we'll be a much better thriving society, because we will be addressing the real symptoms of people's pain and trauma, and not just like trying to slap everything with some sort of punitive action.
Just to add very, very little, because she nailed it, obviously, but just two things that I'd want to add. One, that we have to reconceive of what public safety is and how we achieve it, right? Because the folks, and this is why we need to have this conversation, as uncomfortable as it might be, because many of certainly some of our older, brothers and sisters, some even people of color who live in neighborhoods where they feel that police are necessary to be able to keep them safe. We have to kind of reconceptualize what we mean by public safety and how we achieve it. And also,
good afternoon. Good
afternoon to you too. And I'm gonna go right ahead and mute you. Aha. All right. So we have to reconceptualize what public safety is, and we have to try to engage. As difficult as it might be with some folks who might be resistant to it, we have to engage with them with what do we mean when we say that. It's not just a slogan. Some people have said like it's just a slogan. No, it's not a slogan. It's about reconceptualizing how we get to public safety, what public safety is, and the fact that we can't arrest our way out of every crisis. We probably can't arrest our way out of any crisis, but we certainly can't arrest our way out of homelessness. We can't arrest our way out of addiction. We can't arrest our way out of anything else that you might imagine. So we have to figure out how to be more expansive. And then we have to realize that there will be hopefully a small number of people, but there will be a couple of people who hopefully they get to a point where they start listening and they start engaging. We have to prepare ourselves, because there are folks among us who just say, for the sake of me feeling safe, I don't mind that every now and then a Black boy or a Black girl or a Black woman or a Black man or a person of color or a person at all gets killed by police. That's the breaks. There are folks who think like that. I would think that many think like that because they have not been challenged on their notion of public safety. And so I think that is the part of our job. It is to challenge them and to say, like, let's really dig down. And by starting just where the Madam Public Advocate, or because since Jumani's not here, you're the public advocate. That's the way it works. So Madam Public Advocate, as the Public Advocate said, Madam Public Advocate, why is there's certain things are happening, right? Why is there so let's actually, if we invested over here beforehand, as opposed to trying to do it over here after the problem has been created, let's actually dig down to where the problem came from. Let's try to solve the problem so we can actually not have to try to solve it by arresting our way out of it. So, but there will be folks, let's prepare ourselves, because there will be folks, and there are already. They're saying that regardless of what you think, they're willing to accept that certain things are going to happen, that certain collateral damage is going to occur for them to feel safe. Once we identify who those people are, then we turn them away. We know that we can't win them over. But I think that there's a whole lot of folk who, when engaged in a real way, so that we talk really about what public safety is and how to achieve it, we can actually move in a different direction.
Agreed. Thank you so much. And the comment section has just been buzzing, since both of you have been talking. And a lot of people are saying, instead of building more prisons, we need more psychiatric and behavioral facilities. We also need, not just inpatient facilities, we also need to have outpatient facilities, because for some folks, a psychiatric hospital is where, that's the best place for them to receive treatment at the time. But for other folks, that's not going to be the best place. And we also have to understand that, unfortunately, in this country, there's been a really dark history of psychiatric hospitals, right? So we have to understand why a lot of folks are hesitant about those. And I also liked how people are mentioning we have to make, 1 second, sir. Sorry. Thank you. Hold on. We have such eager participants. Sorry. Yeah. I love someone in the comment also mentioned that we need to have, not just support for folks during a crisis, but how do we prevent the crisis and how do we give folks support after the crisis to try to prevent that revolving door, right? And make sure that we're not just providing individuals who have had a mental health crisis with support, but also their family and friends as well, so they know how to help them out. So we're gonna go to our next, thank you so much. We're gonna go to our next question. Which is, what do you think I think Rama briefly touched on this. What do you think can be done to overcome the stigma surrounding mental health in minority communities? And whoever wants to go first, but we know that stigma is such a huge issue in minority community. So it looks like Deputy Public Advocate Issa-Ibrahim has been selected to go first. So
yeah, sure. This is such a great question, because when I first started going to therapy, maybe 7 years ago, I remember I reached out to my mother after a few sessions, and I had an honest conversation with her, a lot of the reflective work that I was doing in therapy, and I was having a conversation with her about it, and her response was like, "Are you sure your therapist is not exaggerating it to make a little bit more money?" And it hit me so quickly that I was like, oh my God, my mom really doesn't understand the full, just what it means to take care of someone of one's mental health, right? My mom is a survivor of domestic violence, has been incredibly resilient her whole life and never really sought services like that. She just basically was like, I'm a single mom and I'm gonna keep going through life, right? And that kind of resilience really sort of stopped her from accessing a lot of services because, it's a way of survival, right? And so when I was trying to talk to her about my problems, her response was like, well, are you sure it's that big of a deal? And I think it starts there, right? For me, that realization that someone as, educated as my mom was not able to grasp the importance of taking care of our own mental health. It made me realize that my entire community was seeing it the same way. And I thought, the stigma behind it specifically for Muslims and Arabs, I'll speak specifically about Arabs and Arab immigrants, has been a lot of we're coming from countries that are war torn, right? The last 10 years after the Arab Spring and seeing how the community has reacted to it in ways that have been, again, very resilient and very survival mode, have also stopped them from digging deep into what generational trauma can look like and the effects of that in our lives and the lives of our children. And to be able to end stigma that way, it's difficult because we need to have these very open and raw conversations that start at a very grassroots level, right? Just having those conversations in our communities and being able to destigmatize it is a lot of work. But I think it starts with us not separating mental health from physical health. That's one thing. Health is health, whether it's your mental health or your physical health. And that's one piece of it. But the other thing I think that lacks a lot is like I said, the lack of culturally competent services, right? And it's difficult for immigrant communities, for example, like mine, to be able to go and see a therapist, and that therapist not understanding where they're coming from, not understanding their language, not understanding, the trauma of war and migration, right? Not being able to relate to that person. And so I think that one thing that we can do is have programs that will invest in members of our communities to go into these fields. Like I've been reading a little bit on the chat box, folks having difficult times finding psychiatrists or social workers and therapists that can really understand where they're coming from. And I think if we had more programs, like I said, it took me 6 months to hire a social worker that was able to speak Arabic and English. But if there were programs out there, that can fund members of our communities to go into school, to do those, those studies, to come out of those programs and be able to reinvest back into their own communities, I mean, how great would that be? But so many members of our communities, right, are first time going to college, right? And they need financial assistance to be able to go to college, and they need to be able to find jobs that can be able to pay for that financial assistance later on. And nobody wants to go to social work school and then graduate with a master's degree and then have to go to a nonprofit and make $50,000 a year, and that's it, and then wait like years and years and years for incremental salary changes, right? And so really being able to invest in the field, I think it's important. Let's invest in the field. Let's be able to bring Black and brown people and tell them, here's, a program where you can go to social work school, you can become a psychiatrist, you can become an advocate, a mental health counselor, and let's pay you adequately to do that. And let's give you incentives for you to come back to your community and be able to service your community. Because I think that we always go back to this like lack of access, but it's not just the lack of access, it's also lack of culturally competent services. And in order to do that, we need to be able to fund those programs. And in order to fund those programs, we have to invest in the communities themselves.
Thank you for that, Rama. That was great. Can you talk a little bit more about culturally competent services? I feel like we say that a lot, but sometimes people don't really understand what that means. So what does culturally competent mean to you?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, like I said, prior to this life with a public advocate, I was running the Arab American Association of New York, which is a small grassroots organization in Bay Ridge. And we delivered what we call culturally competent services. And we had my immigration services. We also had mental health services, right? What does it mean to deliver culturally competent services? It means that the folks in the community are the ones addressing the problems of that community. So I know what's best for my community. I come from that community, right? We know what's best for our community. And all we need is the resources to be able to provide those services to our community. So culturally competent means that we're hiring people from the community who speak the language, who understand the culture, who are able to relate to someone's experience because they come from a similar experience. And I think we lack a lot of that lens when we talk about services in general, right? I think that for immigrant and minority groups, it's already very difficult to assimilate to a new life in America and in New York City. And when you're trying to have someone address your needs, when it's so difficult to ask for help, like that first step of asking for help is the most difficult step. And you want to be able to ask for help from someone that understands you and knows where you're coming from. You don't want to be in a room where you're trying to, explain your situation and have to educate, quote unquote, educate your therapist about your experiences, right? Of like why migration is hard and why coming from, being a woman in an Arab community, right, could be difficult, right? Like having to explain patriarchy. These things, when you are in a space that is surrounded by people who understand you and come from that same background as you, that goes unsaid. I can sit down with another young woman an Arab immigrant young woman, and we'll be able to immediately relate. I'll be, unspoken words, don't have to even say anything. I'll understand what kind of upbringing that person had and what kind of struggles they've had to endure in the process of migration, for example, or just existing as an immigrant woman, an immigrant Arab woman in our own spaces. That goes unsaid. We understand that. So it's the same when we talk about delivering those kind of culturally competent services. It's just community being able to deliver the services back to its own community.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Senator Rivera, what do you think you need to help? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, love it. Yeah.
Because it's not just focusing, and this less than 30 seconds, just because she absolutely nailed it, obviously. It is not just to focus on the stigma, but to focus on the availability of services on the other side. And so the stigma in a lot of ways there's a lot of mistrust in the medical field, right? And there's for good reason. There's certainly a lot of history there of mistrust. Again, as I said earlier, right? This thing that is underneath everything, right? But focusing on the stigma side is important. Certainly we can as individuals share our experiences, but if we don't focus enough resources on providing culturally competent services by people who are from those communities, like if we don't work on that side, then we're gonna miss the point. But everything else, she got.
Perfect. All right. So we're wrapping up now. So just wanna, and we've been able to include some of the comments and questions that folks have been giving on Facebook and in the chat, which has been great.
Dude randomly saying hello.
And we have so my mistake, this was a town hall, I guess, because there was somebody who decided to ask a question and participate. I just didn't know. But it's great. I love finding out I have a co-host. It's always fun. And people are really pretty much agreeing with what you guys are saying, because what you folks are saying, because it's so accurate, that culturally competent piece. And especially the stigma of having those real honest, raw conversations. I remember the first time I ever saw a therapist was senior year of high school. Nope, I wish. Senior year of college. It was my senior year of college was my first time ever seeing a therapist. I wish I had gone my senior year of high school, And when I went, I was so nervous. I felt like I was doing something wrong, But when I went, it was incredible. And when I was able to finally talk about it with my family, I think it really helped them understand that going to a therapist it's totally fine, If your tooth is hurting, you're not just gonna be like, oh, my tooth hurts, but I'm afraid to go to a dentist. No, you're gonna go, right? It's the same thing with mental health. All right, so thank you so much for sharing that. So, sorry, I muted myself. Like I said, we're wrapping up. That's why I need my co-host here to help me. So what would you say, what are some resources or tools that you suggest to constituents when it comes to mental health? If they're reaching out and they're looking for mental health resources, what are some of the tools and suggestions that you give to them? I think especially in light, and you can, if COVID-19 has impacted how you some of the tools or resources you provide to them, please include that as well.
So one thing that I will say is that, because there's a couple of phone lines that I can mention. But I figure many of those are going to be mentioned by the I was going to call you borough president. No, public advocate. There's one thing, actually, if I may take 2 minutes just to think, because one thing that I think is incredibly important right now in this moment, it's because the question is, how do we actually achieve many of these things, right? And I would argue that adding your voice, your strength, your energy, your body to the public pressure that is happening right now is essential, because there needs to be more pressure on folks like myself. There needs to be more pressure of people in elected office, whether it's like the city council last night. There was some movement. Obviously, there were some things that were not achieved. I was disappointed in some of the votes that happened last night in the New York City Council vote. But the reality is that we wouldn't even be having this conversation if it wasn't for all the people that were pressuring outside. And we cannot stop, right? There's still, again, the public advocate, the other guy, the one that's not here, right? That one, he came up with a really interesting idea. Y'all got to look into that. That's some interesting stuff. But just as a general notion, there needs to be, particularly from those folks who are professionals in the field, who are students in the field, and who are folks who are receiving therapy themselves. All these voices need to be added to the chorus, because there needs to be consistent pressure on the entire political structure. All of these things that we're talking about as far as like the idea that we would have access to all the things that we mentioned here on the side, how schools can be redesigned, how we can think about not just inpatient services, how we can think all these things that we're talking about here, that they are resource based, right? And we just have to make better choices about where we put our resources, and the way that we do that, because we're the ones that make those choices on your behalf. It's if you don't pay attention to what we all do, then the knuckleheads are going to do the bad stuff. And the folks that are trying to, and then folks like myself are like, no, we need the voices of everybody to pressure, so that, yes, there are some resources that I'm sure that we're going to talk about in a second, but just as a long-term thing, there needs to be consistent pressure. Figure out who your local elected officials are, who your city council member, assembly person, state senator, congressperson, all these folks, they are really local, they work for you. Find out about your community board. Figure out who your borough president is. Figure out, put pressure on the mayor, put pressure on the city council people. It has to be consistent. It has to be continued, so that we can actually achieve all these things that we're talking about. So the reassessment of our resources, where we put them and how we use them, let's actually, all of us, join a group. There's power in numbers, right? So you have the reason, again, why anybody was talking inside City Hall, even virtually, because many of them weren't there. But the reason why they were even talking about it was because those folks were out in the City Hall park. So I'll yield my time, but I just wanted to make sure that was mentioned, because it's important for the changes that we need to make happen.
Thank you very much for that. Since we're talking about resources, what resources would you offer, Deputy Public Advocate? Or Madam Public Advocate, as I believe you got her.
Madam Public Advocate, that's right.
What a symposium, right?
I mean, I usually send folks to NAMI most times.
What do you know?
So talk to yourselves, is what she said.
Yes. I send folks to NAMI NYC if folks really need like a hotline immediately. But I also, there's also other organizations on the ground. So if you're a Black or brown person, and again, like we said, and you want some services that are a little bit more tailored to you, there's organizations on the ground who provides mental health services. The problem is that they're not always free, and sometimes they're limited. But that's unfortunately the system that we currently have, which is why I agree with the senator and everything that he said. We got to keep the pressure on these elected officials. We need to say, these are the services that we need. We don't need policing. What we need is mental health services. What we need are diversion centers. What we need are respite centers, right? Those are the things that our communities are in need of. We need the New York Health Act. Like, that's what we need. We don't need more money into policing. We don't need more money into Rikers and all that. Like, what we need are for our community to be able to access those services so they can thrive. And so, yeah, everything that the senator said times 1,000. Just keep the pressure on, keep calling your elected officials, join the groups, put the pressure, because that's the only way that government really moves. It moves because it works for the people. And so it will move in that direction as long as the people put the pressure on it.
And once again, Rosalia Watkins, again, she said, and I quote, "When we were fighting against apartheid, our slogan was, quote, keep pressure on, unquote." So you should just have Rosalia on next time.
There's a lot of, we already have a potential new co-host already, which is great. We have our new panelists. I think this thing is pretty much just taking care of itself. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us at 6 o'clock. So we're just going to have our panelists do our final statements, but I want to say thank you all. For everyone who attended, thank you so much. Thank you attended both via Zoom and via Facebook. Thanks to Naomi Cruz, who's our incredible public policy and advocacy intern, for helping make sure this happened. To June Romanoff, who's our director of communications and marketing, who's behind the scenes, also kind of making sure this all happens. I'm pretty sure, I think I saw my grandmother briefly on this Zoom, so thank you, Granny, for
tuning on to make sure you're not messing up.
Yes, exactly.
You did okay.
My numbers up.
You did okay, Granny. You did okay.
See, I do have a job. I promise you.
Yes.
And so finally,
people are logging off. I'm sorry. As people are logging off, because I see the numbers going down. Census.
Perfect.
Somebody mentioned census. Census. Get counted.
Census.
Cuenta mi gente, coño. Like, come on. Sign up
And
10
let's
minutes.
go ahead. Take us out.
Because
Please.
right now you're on your computer, you're on your phone. Guess what? When the Zoom goes out, go to census.gov and do it right now. Right now. It'll be 10 minutes. Come on, people. 2020 census.gov.
Super quick.
Perfect. Was census.gov, was that your closing statement, Senator?
2020 census.gov, 2020 census.gov, 2020 census.gov, 2020 census.gov, 2020 census.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Rama, if you please take us on out.
I feel like that was such a good way of ending it, though, because 2020 census is so important, so we can get more funding into our communities. We gotta get counted, and we're not being counted. And this is such an important year to be counted. So I think it's a great idea to close it with Census 2020. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank y'all both for joining us. Everyone, please remember Census 2020. If you learn nothing else from this, and I know you learned a lot, but definitely Census 2020. Well, all right. Thank you again so much for joining our panel, symposium, town hall, a little bit of everything. I had a great time with you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great rest of the night.
Next time we'll do it with a drink.
Maybe. Well, don't get me started. All right, everyone. You have a great rest of your day. I'm going to end this now.